Alpha King heard quiet sobs in the kitchen. What he found on the Beta's daughter's skin broke him. The fire in the great hall had burned down to nothing by the time Kalen stood up from his chair. Not his throne. He hated that word. Throne suggested ceremony, and ceremony suggested he had chosen this life, which he had not. He had been born into it the way a storm is born, without consultation, without preference, without anyone thinking to ask whether the thunder wanted to be loud. The chair at the head of the great hall was simply where he sat. It was large, made of dark carved wood that had belonged to his father and his father's father before that, and it fit him the way a cage fits the animal grown too big to leave it. Perfectly. Exactly. Without any room left over. He crossed the hall alone. That was the thing about being Alpha King that no one warned you about. They told you about the weight of decisions, about the sleepless nights before battle, about the way every pack member's pain eventually found its way to your door like a river finding the lowest point in the valley. They did not tell you about the particular quality of silence in a large hall after everyone else had gone to bed. They did not tell you how loud your own footsteps sounded when there was no one else to drown them out. Kalen's pack, the Iron Veil pack, occupied the largest territory in the northern lands. 312 members, spread across the main estate and 4 satellite settlements within the mountain range. He knew each of their names. He had made a point of that since the day he took command at 19, when the previous Alpha, his uncle, had died of a sickness that spread faster than anyone could contain it. Kalen had stood in front of 300 grieving, frightened people and said their names, one by one, until the fear in the room had shifted into something more manageable. It had taken 4 hours. His voice had been raw at the end. No one had ever forgotten it. That was the kind of leader he was. The kind who remembered, the kind who showed up. What he was not, and had never pretended to be, was the kind of leader who was easy to be near. Devoted, yes. Reliable, absolutely. Warm, that was a different word, meant for different people. And Kalen had long since accepted that it did not belong to him. He was not cold. He was something more precise than cold. He was contained. Every feeling he had moved through a system of internal checks before it reached his face or his voice. And by the time it arrived, it had been organized and measured and placed somewhere useful. Grief became strategy. Anger became planning. Whatever softer things lived in the middle he had learned, over years, to route somewhere they would not cause damage. His beta, Harlan Voss, had told him once that this quality was his greatest strength. Kalen had nodded and moved on, and not thought about it again. He walked to the window at the far end of the hall. Outside, the Iron Veil territory spread out below him, rooftops visible in the moonlight, the training grounds dark and empty, the tree line beginning a quarter-mile out and climbing the mountain slope until it vanished into cloud. Somewhere in those trees, sentries were moving in their rotations, steady and silent. He had trained them personally. They would not fail. Inside the estate, everything was quiet. This was the time of night Kalen liked best, not because he enjoyed the solitude. He neither enjoyed nor disliked it. The way a man who has always lived alone does not feel the lack of company because he has no memory of what it would add, but because it was the only time the estate was fully still. During the day, there was always something demanding his attention. A dispute between families in the eastern settlement, a training injury that needed his sign-off on treatment protocol, pack members who wanted 5 minutes of his time and stretched it to 15, then 20, then remembered one more thing, as he was already turning away. At night, there was only the building and the fire and his own thoughts. He stood at the window for a long time. The thing on his mind was not a crisis. That was the frustrating part. It was something smaller, a dissatisfaction without a name, the feeling of a gear turning slightly out of alignment. The pack was stable. The borders were secure. The winter stores were well above what they needed. By any measurement that mattered, Iron Veil was thriving. And yet, Kalen pressed one hand flat against the cold glass and looked at the dark territory below him and felt nothing he could explain to anyone. Not emptiness exactly, more like the awareness of a room where something used to be, now just the outline of where it stood. He turned away from the window. He was 31 years old. He had been Alpha King for 12 years. He had never once, in those 12 years, allowed himself to wonder whether he was building something worth living in, as opposed to simply worth protecting. Those were different questions, and he had chosen, very deliberately, to only answer one of them. He picked up the report from the table near the fire, trade agreements with the coastal packs, numbers he had already read twice and would read again in the morning, and carried it toward the corridor that led to his private rooms. He passed the kitchen. He was not supposed to pass the kitchen. His rooms were in the north wing. The kitchen was in the central building, past the great hall, in a direction he had no reason to walk. He had gone to the window on the far end out of habit. which meant he was now returning from the wrong side of the hall, which meant he was walking a route he almost never walked at this hour. Later, he would think about that, about the specific chain of small, unremarkable choices that placed him in a hallway he had no reason to be in, at an hour no one else was awake, moving in a direction he had not planned. He heard it before he saw anything. It was not a sound that announced itself. It was not a cry, not a sob in the way the word is usually meant, dramatic, unavoidable, the kind that demands attention. This was the opposite of that. This was the sound of someone working very hard against a sound, the sound underneath the effort of silence. A breath that caught, a stillness that was too controlled to be natural, the particular quiet of a person who had learned that being heard was dangerous. Kalen had spent 12 years listening for threats. He could hear a sentry change their breathing pattern at 200 yards. He could detect the difference between a wolf moving through underbrush and a human moving through it. His senses had been trained and tuned until they were instruments, not organs. He stopped walking. The kitchen door was slightly open. A thin line of low amber light came through the gap, not the overhead lights, just the small lamp kept on the counter near the herb jars, the one that was always left on so the night staff could navigate without waking anyone. He stood in the corridor for a moment. The sound came again. Just once. Then nothing. He pushed the door open. The kitchen was large enough to serve the entire main estate. Long wooden counters, copper pots hanging from ceiling racks, a fireplace at the far end that served double duty as both cooking hearth and heat source. In the daytime it was crowded and warm and smelled of bread and whatever Nora, the head cook, had decided to make that morning. At this hour it was cool and still, and smelled of the herbs hanging to dry near the window. A girl sat at the far end of the kitchen table. She was not facing him. She was sitting with her back mostly turned, bent slightly forward over the table, and her shoulders were doing something that her stillness was trying very hard to hide. The faintest tremble, controlled but not completely. She was wearing a loose gray shirt, sleeves pushed up to the elbow. Her dark hair was down, falling around her face, and she had one hand pressed flat on the surface of the table, the way people press a hand flat when they are trying to hold themselves together through the pressure of a palm on something solid. Kalen stood in the doorway. He knew who she was, Sarah Voss, his beta's daughter. 20 years old. She had lived in the pack house since her mother died 3 years ago, when Harlan had brought her back from the small settlement where they had been living separately. A detail Kalen had filed at the time as a family matter, none of his business, the kind of personal arrangement that pack members navigated without requiring his involvement. She helped in the kitchen. She helped with laundry, with record keeping, with whatever was needed. She did not attend communal dinners as a guest. She was simply there, present in the way that useful, quiet people become invisible in large households, noticed only when something they usually do does not get done. Kalen had said perhaps 15 words to her in 3 years. He thought about that now, standing in the doorway, looking at the tremble in her shoulders that she did not know he could see. He thought about it and did not know what to do with the thought, so he stepped into the kitchen. She heard him. He knew the moment she did because her whole body went different. Not tense, not exactly, but sealed. Everything sealed inward. She straightened her spine and lowered her head and used her free hand to pull her sleeve down in a motion so practiced it was nearly invisible. By the time she turned to look at who had come in, her face was composed. Her eyes were dry. She looked like someone who had simply been sitting in the kitchen at an odd hour, doing nothing in particular, waiting for nothing in particular. She looked like someone who had done this before. "Alpha King," she said. Her voice was steady. He noticed that. Steady and quiet and completely uninflected. The voice of someone who had learned to give nothing away in a greeting. "Sarah," he said. She blinked. He realized, a beat too late, that he had never used her name before, that she had probably not expected him to know it, that the simple fact of him saying it had startled her in some small way, that she was now working to smooth over. "I was just getting some water," she said. "I did not mean to disturb anything." There was no water on the table. Kalen looked at the table, and then at her, and said nothing about the water. He walked to the counter instead, the long one nearest the fire, and opened the cabinet where the cups were kept. He took 2. He filled both at the tap. He carried them to the table, and set one in front of her, and kept one for himself, and sat down across from her. She stared at the cup. He sat back in the chair, the ordinary wooden chair of an ordinary kitchen, nothing like the carved thing in the great hall, and looked at the table between them, and did not say anything for a moment. This was the thing that most people did not understand about Kalen. They expected the Alpha King to fill silence, to command it, to direct it, to deploy words like tools until the silence submitted. He did not do that. Silence, in his experience, Told you more than words did if you waited long enough. People spoke into silence because they could not bear it. What they said when they finally broke was always more true than what they would have offered up front. He waited. Sarah picked up the cup, drank from it, set it down. You should sleep, she said. You have the trade committee meeting in the morning. He looked at her. She glanced away. A small color came into her face. Harlan mentioned it, she said, at dinner. I know about my own schedule, he said. Of course. She looked at the cup again. I only meant, I did not want to keep you. You are not keeping me, he said. Another silence. This one had a different quality than the first, slightly less defended. Is there something you need? She asked. From the kitchen, I can get it for you. There it was. The instinct to make herself useful so she had a reason to be in the room. The automatic offer of service as a kind of social armor. He had seen it in pack members who had grown up in difficult circumstances, the children of families with very little, who had learned early that their presence needed to be justified by their usefulness. He had seen it. He was seeing it now. And he was also seeing the way her right sleeve had not fully come down when she pulled it, the way the fabric had folded back slightly at the cuff, and what he could see where the fold was. He was not going to look at that directly. Not yet. Not in a way that would seal her back up completely. He looked at her face instead. I do not need anything, he said. Sit. She sat. She had not been standing, but somehow she sat differently after he said it, slightly less as if she were about to leave at any moment. They sat in the kitchen, the two of them, in the low amber light, with the herbs drying in the window and the copper pots hanging still overhead, and the building quiet around them in every direction. Outside, the mountain was dark. The sentries were moving in their rotations. Somewhere, 312 people were sleeping. Kalen held his cup with both hands. He did not know what he was doing exactly. He was sitting in his kitchen at nearly 3 a.m. with a girl he had barely spoken to, a girl who had just been crying in the way that people cry when they have been doing it for a long time, and have gotten very good at doing it quietly, and he was sitting across from her and drinking water and not saying anything useful because there was nothing useful to say. What he knew, sitting there, was this. He had walked every hall of this estate for 12 years. He had learned every corner of this territory, every name in every settlement, every complaint and request and crisis and celebration. He had prided himself on knowing his pack. And Sarah Voss had been sitting in this kitchen, alone, for 3 years, and he had not known it. Not known it in the way that mattered. Not known what she was, not known the shape of her days, not known whether she was sleeping or eating or whether she had one single person in this estate who asked her, with genuine interest, how she was. He thought he probably knew the answer to that last one. How long have you been awake? He asked. She looked at him. Just briefly, then away. Not long, she said. It was not the truth. He could hear it was not the truth. He did not push it. The kitchen is warm, he said, warmer than the rest of the house at night. She nodded, and some small part of her, the part that had been expecting a different kind of conversation, an uncomfortable one, a demanding one, relaxed by a fraction of a degree. Nora keeps the fire banked, she said. It holds until morning. I know, he said. She has done it that way for 20 years. A small pause. Something shifted in Sarah's expression, not much, just slightly. You know how Nora keeps the fire, she said. I know how everyone in this estate does their work, he said. It is my job to know. She looked at him then, a full look, not the careful glancing she had been doing, and something in it was curious. Not suspicious exactly, more like someone encountering a thing they had been told one version of and are now being shown something different. Harlan says you do not pay attention to small things, she said. She heard herself say it. Color rushed into her face immediately, not embarrassment, something sharper, like she had opened a door without checking what was behind it. I am sorry, she said quickly. I should not have. No, he said. She stopped. Tell me what Harlan says, he said. His voice was even. No edge in it, no demand. Just the straightforward interest of someone who genuinely wanted to know. Because he did genuinely want to know. He wanted to know what was said about him in the rooms he was not in. He always wanted to know that. It was another form of intelligence. But he also wanted to know, specifically and precisely, what Harlan Voss said to his daughter about the Alpha King in the house where she lived, in the small quotient of attention that was apparently paid to her. Sarah looked at the table. He says you only care about outcomes, she said, not about the people behind them. Kalen was quiet for a moment. And what do you think? He asked. She looked up. The question had surprised her again, the second time in 5 minutes. He noticed that surprises came to her face as something close to alarm before they settled into anything else, as though being surprised was, for her, usually an unpleasant experience. "I do not know," she said carefully. "I have not spoken to you enough to think anything." "That is honest," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I thought it would be rude," she said, "but the other answer would have been dishonest." "Rude and honest," he said, "is better than polite and false." Something very small moved in her expression, the faintest possibility of something lighter. "Harlan would disagree," she said. And then she seemed to hear that too, and the lightness went away, and she looked at the table again, carefully, with both hands wrapped around the cup. Kalen noted it. He noted all of it, the way she arrived at something and then pulled back, the way Harlan's name operated in her like a switch, the way she was sitting in this kitchen at 3 a.m. having cried in the exact manner of someone who had been doing it alone for a very long time. He noted it and said nothing and sat with her in the warm kitchen until she stopped sitting as though she were about to leave. That was all he did. That was enough, for now. He did not know yet what he had found, sitting in this kitchen at 3 a.m. with a girl whose sleeves were slightly wrong, and whose composure was too practiced to have been built in safety. He did not know the full shape of it. But he knew this. Something in this estate was not right. Something in his pack, the one he had told himself he knew, had been wrong for a long time. And he had not known. That fact sat in him like a stone dropped into still water, and the rings were still moving outward when he finally stood up, said goodnight to Sarah Voss in her carefully steady voice, and walked back through the dark corridor toward the north wing, with the trade report still in his hand, and something new and cold and attentive living in his chest, where a minute ago there had only been the familiar silence. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his chair by his window and looked at the territory below him, the rooftops and the training grounds and the dark line of trees, and he thought about all the things he knew about Ironvale Pack and whether he had confused the knowledge of names with the knowledge of lives. He thought they might be very different things. He thought he had, perhaps, made that mistake for a very long time. Outside, the mountain was still dark, and the sentries were moving in their rotations, steady and faithful, and somewhere in the central building, in the kitchen with the banked fire and the drying herbs, a 20-year-old girl had pulled her sleeve back down and gone back to being invisible. And the Alpha King, for the first time in 12 years, was paying attention to the wrong he did not yet have a name for. Sarah had learned very early that mornings were safer than nights. Nights were when the house settled into itself and the sounds changed and the walls that seemed large during the day suddenly felt much smaller. Nights were when doors could open without warning. Nights were when the version of her father that showed up at communal dinners, composed, authoritative, the beta who had served the Alpha King for 15 years without a single misstep, put itself away somewhere, and something else came out in its place. Mornings were different. Mornings had Nora. Nora Webb was 63 years old, built like a woman who had been arguing with weather her entire life and winning, and she had run the packhouse kitchen since before Sarah was born. She did not ask Sarah questions. She did not look at Sarah with the specific quality of pity that Sarah had come to dread, that careful, sidelong, saying nothing look that people gave when they suspected something and had decided it was not their business. Nora simply handed Sarah tasks. Peel this, stir that, the bread needs turning. She spoke in the language of things that needed doing, and Sarah, who had been built by years of need to do into someone who functioned best inside clear tasks, had found something close to peace in it. She was peeling potatoes when Nora came in at 6 a.m. "You are here early," Nora said. Not an accusation. Not a question, just an observation, delivered the way Nora delivered most things. Flatly, without decoration. "I could not sleep," Sarah said. Nora looked at her for exactly 1 second longer than a comment about potatoes required, then moved to the fireplace and began building the morning fire up from the banked coals. "The Alpha King was up late," she said, her back to Sarah. "I heard him in the corridor around 3. Sarah's hands kept moving on the potato. Steady. "I would not know about that," she said. "No," said Nora. "I suppose not." Silence. The fire caught. Nora straightened up with the kind of careful movement of someone whose knees had been reporting grievances for several years, and began pulling pots from the rack. Sarah thought about the kitchen at 3 a.m, about the Alpha King sitting across from her with a cup of water he had not needed, and his trade report still in his hand and his eyes. She had not expected his eyes to be like that. She had constructed a version of Kalen in her head over 3 years of living in his house, without ever speaking to him, severe, distant, impatient with anything small. The king version, not the person version. A figure that existed in hallways and the head of the great table, and not in the ordinary chair of the kitchen at 3 in the morning, asking her what she thought. He had asked what she thought. No one asked her what she thought. She put the peeled potato in the pot and picked up the next one. "Nora," she said. Does the Alpha King often come through the central building at night?" Nora was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet when she was deciding how much of something to give. "He walks," she said finally. "Has always walked. Since he was young. His father did the same." She paused. "Why?" "No reason," Sarah said. "I was only curious." Nora looked at her again, that same 1 second too long. Then she turned back to her pots. Sarah finished the potatoes. She moved to the bread that had been rising overnight in the proving baskets, turned it out onto the floured counter, and began the process of shaping the loaves. Her hands knew this. They knew the weight of dough, the way it should feel, the specific resistance that meant it was ready. She had learned in the years since her mother died that her hands knew things her mind could not always hold on to. When everything else became unreliable, sounds, sleep, the predictable nature of days, her hands still knew bread, still knew how to press and fold. It was something. The morning built itself around her. Pack members filtered in for breakfast in waves. The youngest children first, noisy and half awake, trailing after their parents. Then the training groups, arriving in organized clusters, smelling of early morning exercise and cold air. Then the senior members, the council advisors, the ranking wolves who ate at the long center table and spoke in low, efficient voices about the day ahead. Sarah moved through all of it, serving, clearing, refilling, returning to the kitchen, coming back out again, and was looked through by most of them the way you look through a window. You see the glasses there. You do not particularly think about it. One of the training captains, a broad-shouldered man named Owen Cole who had been at Ironvale for 8 years, thanked her for the coffee. He said it every morning. Sarah had learned over time that it was automatic. He would have thanked a chair if the chair had handed him a cup. But she said you are welcome every morning anyway, because it was the nearest thing to a conversation she usually had before noon. Her father appeared at the head table at 8. Sarah had learned to track him the way you track weather, not because she was watching for him exactly, but because her body had developed, over years, a kind of awareness that operated below conscious thought, a monitoring that happened automatically, the way a plant turns toward light without deciding to. When Harlan Voss entered a room, something in Sarah registered it before she had finished processing that she had seen him. He sat down. He nodded to the men on either side of him. He picked up the cup that Sarah had filled minutes before. She had timed it, as she always did, so his coffee was hot when he arrived. Because if it was cold, there was a comment, and comments had textures that varied, and she had learned to prefer the texture of silence. He did not look at her. He rarely did, in public. In public, she was part of the furniture. It was the private version of her father that knew she existed, and the private version was the one that made the furniture metaphor feel less like an insult and more like a thing she would have chosen. She went back to the kitchen. Nora was rolling pastry at the far counter. "Eat something," she said, without turning around. "I am not hungry." That was not a question. Sarah picked up a piece of bread from the cooling rack and ate it standing at the counter. It was the same bread she had shaped that morning, the same weight her hands had known before her mind caught up. She ate it without tasting it, because food had become, over the years, a functional thing, fuel for the body that still needed to work. She did not dislike food. She simply had no strong feelings about it. The way you have no strong feelings about something, you do it because it has to be done rather than because you want to. She thought briefly about the Alpha King asking if she had enough water, setting a second cup in front of her, not asking whether she wanted it, just putting it there. She thought about that for exactly 2 seconds and then put it somewhere she was not looking at. The day moved forward the way days did. She cleaned the dining hall after breakfast. She helped Nora prepare the midday meal. She carried records from the household ledger to the small room near the back of the estate where the administrative work was done, because one of the tasks that had accumulated to her over 3 years was the recording of supplies and costs, a job that had previously belonged to a girl named Lucy who had mated and moved to the Eastern Settlement and not been replaced with anyone paid. Sarah did not mind the records. They were like bread. The hands knew what to do. The small back room had one window that faced the training grounds. She could see, if she looked up, the afternoon training session for the younger wolves. Teenagers mostly, 15 and 16, running drills in the cold air under the supervision of Owen Cole, who was a harsh trainer and an excellent one. She watched them for a moment. She had been 15 once, had grown up in the smaller settlement where her parents had lived, In the years when her mother was still alive and her father was still the version of himself that existed in daylight all the time, she had run in fields near that settlement. She had climbed trees and gotten mud on her shoes and argued with her mother about whether she had to finish her dinner before she could go back outside. She had not climbed a tree in 5 years. She looked back down at the ledger. The afternoon brought a different kind of quiet. The pack members who worked regular hours were in their tasks. The children who attended the estate school were in lessons. The kitchen was between meals and Nora was resting, which she did every afternoon in the chair near the south window with a book she claimed she had been reading for 4 years and was almost finished with. The estate had a particular texture in this middle afternoon stretch. Not empty, not crowded, but settled, like a held breath. Sarah carried the completed records back to the household file room and was returning through the corridor when she nearly walked directly into the Alpha King. She pulled up short. He had come around the corner from the direction of the council chamber, moving with the focused forward momentum of someone who had just come out of a meeting and was already thinking 3 steps ahead. He stopped when she appeared in front of him, and for a moment they were just 2 people standing in a corridor. "Sarah," he said. Again with her name. She had to stop being surprised by it. "Alpha King," she said. She stepped to the side to give him room to pass. It was automatic, a lateral movement practiced so many times it had stopped requiring thought. He did not pass. "How are you?" he said. It was not phrased as a question exactly, more as a statement with a door in it that could go either way. "Well," she said, "thank you." He looked at her with the same expression he had worn at 3 in the morning, not exactly studying her, but not casually looking either. The expression of someone paying the specific kind of attention that most people reserve for things that matter to them. "You look tired," he said. "I am fine," she said. "I did not say you were not fine," he said. "I said you looked tired." She opened her mouth and then closed it again, because there was no good response to that. He was right, she was tired. She had been tired for 3 years or longer, in the slow accumulated way of someone who does not sleep fully and does not eat fully, and spends the energy her body generates on things other than living. "I sleep in cycles," she said. "I always have." "You should tell Nora," he said. "She keeps a particular tea for it. Chamomile and something else. She gave it to me every week for 2 years after my uncle died, and I stopped sleeping." Sarah stared at him. "The Alpha King drinks chamomile tea," she said, before she could stop herself. Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, the shape of one perhaps, in the very early stages. "The Alpha King does whatever works," he said. "Dignity is for people who are well rested." She looked at him for a moment with something she had not felt in a long time, the uncomplicated surprise of someone being funnier than expected. "I will ask Nora," she said. He nodded. His expression settled back into its usual calm, and he moved past her down the corridor. She stood for a moment after he had gone, holding the empty ledger folder in both hands, standing in the hallway where the afternoon light came through the high windows at a long, late angle. He had stopped. He had stopped in the corridor to ask how she was, to say she looked tired, to tell her about chamomile tea with a delivery so dry she had not immediately known it was a joke. He had said it the way he had set down the second cup of water, without making anything of it, without requiring anything back. She walked back toward the kitchen. That evening, the communal dinner was attended by most of the main estate residents. Sarah served. She had a place at the table, technically. Everyone in the pack had a place at the table. That was one of the things that Ironvale's founding rules specified very clearly. Every member eats. But her place had, over time, migrated from the eating side of the equation to the serving side. She was not sure when that had happened. She was not sure anyone had explicitly decided it. It had simply accumulated, the way tasks accumulated to useful, quiet people who did not say no. Her father sat at the head table and laughed at something the council secretary said, and poured his own wine, and was, as he always was in this room at this hour, completely and entirely the version of himself that the pack saw. Sarah carried a platter to the far end of the table and set it down and straightened up and found, for just a moment, that she was looking at the Alpha King at the center of the head table. He was not looking at her. He was talking to the council member on his left, something evidently requiring his full attention. He did not glance toward the serving end of the room. He gave no sign that he had spoken to her that afternoon in the corridor or sat across from her in the kitchen at 3 in the morning. She did not expect him to. She picked up the empty platter and went back to the kitchen. Later, after the dinner had been cleared and the kitchen cleaned and Nora had gone to bed with her 4-year book and the estate had entered its night quiet, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. She had found it where Nora kept it, on the third shelf behind the ordinary tea, in a tin painted with faded blue flowers. and she sat with both hands around the warmth of the cup and looked at the grain of the wood on the table. She was not crying. She was something else tonight, something she did not have a word for, something that had the shape of wanting, without quite knowing what it wanted, like a door she had not known was there, open just a crack, letting through a thin line of different air. She drank her tea. Outside, the mountain was dark. Somewhere in the north wing, the Alpha King who knew how Nora kept the fire and drank chamomile tea for sleeplessness, and stopped in hallways to say you looked tired, was either sleeping or not sleeping. She thought perhaps that he was probably not sleeping. She thought she understood that better than she would have said. The kitchen was warm. The fire held through the night the way it always did. Sarah sat with her tea until it was gone and then washed the cup and put it back and went to her room, which was on the small corridor off the eastern side of the estate, a room barely large enough for a bed and a chair and a window that faced the courtyard wall. She lay down. She thought about what it had felt like, for those minutes in the corridor, to have someone stop walking because of her. She did not know what to do with the feeling. She put it next to the cup of water and the question about what she thought, in the place where she was not currently looking, and she closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she slept before 3 in the morning. The third night, Kalen heard it again. He had not been walking toward the kitchen. He had been honest with himself about that since the first night, had sat in the north wing with his reports and his cold coffee, and his very deliberately not thoughts about the corridor and the kettle, and the girl who pulled her sleeve down in one practiced motion, and told himself that he was not going to make a habit of this. He was the Alpha King. He had 312 pack members. He did not have the excess of attention to spend on one person's late-night kitchen habits. He had told himself that, and gone to bed at a reasonable hour on the second night, and lain awake until 1 in the morning, at which point he had gotten up, picked up the trade reports he still had not finished reading, walked through the great hall, and gone to the window on the wrong side of the building. He had not gone to the kitchen. He had stood at the window for 40 minutes and then gone back to bed. On the third night he heard the sound from the corridor even before he reached the window. It was the same as before. That particular quality of contained sound, the opposite of a cry, the sound underneath the effort of silence. He stood in the corridor for a moment with his hand flat against the stone wall, and made no decisions at all for approximately 30 seconds. Then he pushed the kitchen door open. She was in the same chair. Same position, more or less. Bent slightly forward. One hand flat on the table. Dark hair down around her face. The gray shirt again, or a different one that looked the same. Left sleeve down. Right sleeve pushed up to the elbow. He saw her arm. He had seen it before. The fold of fabric at the cuff on the first night, the brief exposure. Not enough to be sure of what he was seeing. Tonight there was enough light from the kitchen lamp, and she was turned at the right angle. And he was standing at the right distance, and he saw it clearly. He stayed very still in the doorway. The marks on her forearm were not new. They were layered in the way that time makes things, some older and faded to silver, some less old, some somewhere in between. They told a story in the language of what had been done, and when, and how many times, and over how long a period. He could read that language. He had been reading it on pack members since he was a young man, had seen it on soldiers and on survivors and on people who had lived inside situations that left marks the way weather leaves marks on stone, not all at once but reliably, over years, until the stone is shaped by what it endured. He had never seen it on someone living in his own house. She heard him. The same instant ceiling, everything inward, sleeve pulled down, spine straightened, face arranged into the expression that was not quite neutral and not quite composed but was the practiced version of both. By the time she turned to look at him, she could have been anyone, sitting anywhere, doing nothing in particular. "Alpha King," she said. He came in. He did not say anything about what he had seen. He walked to the counter. He put the kettle on. He found 2 cups. He opened the tin with the faded blue flowers, which he noted was now on the second shelf rather than the third, which meant she had been using it, which meant the chamomile tea recommendation had landed. He measured tea into both cups the way Nora had shown him years ago. Nora had very specific feelings about the correct amount of tea for a given cup, and had communicated those feelings with the directness of someone who considered imprecise tea-making a moral failing, and he carried them to the table and sat down. Sarah looked at the cup in front of her. "You made tea," she said. "Apparently," he said. "Do you know how to make tea?" "Nora taught me. She has very strong opinions about the matter." Sarah picked up the cup. Her hands, he noticed, were steady. She wrapped both of them around the ceramic and looked into the pale liquid and then looked up at him. "You were at the window again," she said, "on the wrong side of the building." He looked at her. I can hear footsteps in the corridor, she said. I have been here long enough to know which ones are which. A small pause. Yours are different from the others. More even. He considered that. You catalogued my footsteps, he said. I catalogued everyone's, she said. It is useful to know who is coming before they arrive. There was something in the way she said it. Not casual, not the tone of a person describing a curious personal habit, more the tone of a person describing something that had become necessary. He heard that. He set the information beside the sleeve and the middle of the night crying and the automatic step to the side in the corridor, and the reflexive offer to get him something from the kitchen, and he looked at what all of those things added up to, and felt something very cold and very precise begin to settle in his chest. Sarah, he said. Yes. Are you safe in this house? The question landed in the kitchen the way a stone lands in water, not loudly, but with a spread of movement that reached every edge. He watched her face. He watched what happened to the careful composition of it when the question arrived. It did not crack. That was the first thing he noticed. It did not crack because it was very, very good at not cracking. It had years of practice at not cracking. But underneath the practice, something moved. The way something moves under ice when the season is changing. Not visible from the surface, but felt. Of course, she said. That was very fast, he said. She looked at the table. What would you like me to say? Whatever is true, he said. Only that. Silence. The kettle behind him made a small sound as the metal expanded with heat. Outside, the mountain was exactly as dark as it always was at this hour. Sarah's hands moved on the cup, a slow circular motion of her thumbs on the ceramic. I am safe, she said. I am not in any immediate danger. He noticed the specific calibration of those words. Safe. Not in any immediate danger. Words chosen with the precision of someone who had learned to answer questions technically rather than honestly. Those two sentences are not the same thing, he said. She looked at him. Being safe, he said, and not being in immediate danger at this specific moment. Those are different statements. You said both. You did not say the same thing twice. Sarah was quiet for a moment. She looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not the careful neutral, not the arranged composure. Something more direct, something with a sharper edge. You pay very close attention, she said. Yes, he said, I always have. Harlan says you do not. I know what Harlan says, he said. Harlan has been saying it for 15 years, in my presence and presumably out of it. It is useful for him to believe it is true. She went still. That was a sentence with a door in it, and they both knew it, and neither of them went through it immediately. Kalen picked up his tea. He let the silence do what silence did when you were patient enough to let it work. Sarah set her cup down, very carefully. She looked at the surface of the table with the concentration of someone reading something written there. My mother died 3 years ago, she said. I know, he said. I am sorry. She was sick, she said. It was not a sudden thing. She was sick for almost 2 years before. A pause. My father and I came back to the main estate after. He said it would be better here. More people. More routine. She stopped. Was it? He asked. Better here? She picked up the cup again, held it. Routine, she said. Yes, it was very routine. He did not push further. He heard the shape of what was not being said. Heard it the way he heard the shape of a territory, by what the scouts did not report as much as what they did. The absence of something was its own information. What Sarah was not saying filled the kitchen more completely than what she was saying. You have been here 3 years, he said. Yes. And in 3 years no one has asked you those questions. She looked up. The expression on her face when she met his eyes was something he did not have a clean word for. It was not gratitude. It was something rawer than gratitude. Something more surprised by itself. No, she said. He held his cup in both hands. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly. He could hear it against the high kitchen windows, the soft, insistent pressure of it. I should have asked sooner, he said. She shook her head quickly. You have an entire pack. Yes, he said. And you are part of it. She stopped shaking her head. He watched her absorb that. The fact of it. Not a kindness exactly. Not a gesture. But a simple statement of what was true. You are part of this pack. You fall inside the boundary of what I am responsible for. That is not a favor I am extending to you. It is a fact that has always been true that I am only now saying out loud. My father is a good beta, she said, carefully. The words placed like someone putting fragile things down on uncertain ground. He is, said Kalen. He has served you well. He has, said Kalen. And both of those things can be true at the same time as other things that I will ask you about when you are ready. She looked at him. Not tonight, he said. You do not have to say anything tonight. She exhaled. It was the smallest sound, just the release of a breath held slightly too long. But it was the first time since he had walked into the kitchen that her body had done something outside of her deliberate control, and he counted it as a thing that mattered. They sat together in the warm kitchen for a long time without speaking. This had a different quality than the first night's silence. The first night had been careful, had been two strangers in an unexpected place managing the strangeness. This silence was something else, something that had begun to develop its own particular texture. Not comfortable exactly, not yet, but known. The silence of two people who had begun to understand how the other one used it. Kalen drank his tea. Sarah drank hers. At some point she asked him about the trade negotiations with the coastal packs, not to make conversation, he thought, but because she had genuinely heard something about them that she was curious about. The coastal packs had a different governance system, looser and more distributed, and she asked about it with the focus of someone who thought carefully about how systems worked. He found himself explaining it properly. Not the abbreviated version he gave in council meetings, but the real version, with the complications laid out, because she was asking real questions. She knew more about pack governance than he had expected. Harlan discusses pack business at dinner, she said, when he noted it. I listen. He knows you do? He knows I am there, she said. Whether he thinks about what I do with what I hear, I am not sure. Kalen looked at her. She had said it without emphasis, without drama, that just the plain observation of someone who had learned to be invisible enough that people spoke freely near her. He thought about what 15 years of being Harlan's second-hand audience might have given her in terms of information about how this pack worked. He thought about what she might know without having been told directly. He thought about how much of what she knew she had shared with anyone. He thought the answer to that last one was probably very little. They did not stay much longer. Sarah finished her tea and stood up and said she should get some sleep before the bread needed to be started, and Kalen said yes, and she collected the cups and washed them at the sink with the same efficiency she brought to everything, and dried them and put them back on the shelf. At the door she stopped. Alpha King, she said. He looked at her. She opened her mouth and then, briefly, closed it again, as though the thing she had meant to say had needed a last check before it was allowed out. Then she said it. Thank you, she said, for sitting here, both times. He held her gaze. Get some sleep, Sarah, he said. She nodded once. She went. He sat in the kitchen alone for a while after, with his empty cup and the low amber light and the herbs drying in the window, and he thought about a beta who had served him faithfully for 15 years, and a daughter who catalogued footsteps because it was useful to know who was coming before they arrived. He thought about the marks he had seen on her arm. He thought about the word routine and what it meant when someone chose it in place of the word better. He thought about 15 years, and a pack that prided itself on knowing its members, and one kitchen at 3 in the morning that had been sitting here all along with its particular quietly contained sound. In the morning he had 4 meetings, a training evaluation, correspondence with 2 neighboring alphas, a dispute about grazing rights in the Southern Territory. In the morning, he also had a conversation to begin, not with Sarah, not yet, but a quiet, careful, thorough conversation with the people in this estate who saw things from the ground level. The pack healer, the senior household staff, the records keeper. He was the Alpha King. He had built his reputation on knowing his pack. He was about to find out how much of it had been the surface of knowing, and how much had been the real thing. The pack healer's name was Dora Finch. She was 57 years old, slight and spare. With silver hair she kept pinned close to her head, and reading glasses she wore on a cord around her neck, and eyes that had seen enough over 30 years of practice that they had developed a particular quality. Not hardness exactly, more like the quality of someone who had learned to hold difficult information without being broken by it, because the holding of it was their job, and they had chosen the job fully. Kalen had trusted her completely for 12 years. He thought about that now, sitting across from her in her small office off the main corridor, with the morning light coming through the window at a low, cold angle, and the ledger she had placed on the table between them. He had come to her at 7 in the morning, before most of the estate was fully awake. He had knocked on her door. He had said, I need to speak with you about Sarah Voss. She had looked at him for a moment, that long, level, appraising look that he had always respected in her, and then she had opened the door wider and said yes, and gone to get the ledger before he had even sat down. That told him something. The ledger was not the main records book. It was smaller, bound in plain brown, the kind of thing that looked like a supply list or a medicine inventory if you found it in a shelf without context. She set it on the table and folded her hands on top of it and looked at him. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Long enough," she said. "That I should have come to you sooner is something I will carry for a long time." He looked at the ledger. "Show me." She opened it. The entries were dated. The first one was from 14 months after Sarah arrived at the main estate, which meant it was roughly a year and 8 months ago. The handwriting was Dora's, precise and small, the handwriting of someone trained to fit a lot of information into a small space. Each entry had a date, a brief clinical description, and a notation she had developed her own shorthand for. Kalen read through the first 5 entries slowly. Then he stopped reading and sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the opposite wall for a moment. "She came to you," he said. "Not initially," Dora said. "The first time I saw her, she had come for a headache. She sat in the chair there and I gave her the remedy and she was very polite and very contained, and I would not have seen anything except that she reached across to take the cup and her sleeve moved, and I saw her forearm." A pause. "I asked her about it, directly. What did she say?" "She said she had fallen," Dora said. "She said it with complete steadiness and no eye contact. Then she corrected the eye contact immediately." Another pause. "I have heard a great many explanations in 30 years of practice. You learn to hear the ones that are recited from memory, rather than spoken from experience." Kalen looked back at the ledger. "She came back on her own after that," Dora said, "about 6 weeks later. Not for treatment. She sat in the chair and she did not say anything for a while, and then she said she wanted to know if I kept records." "She asked if you kept records," he said. "She wanted to know if there was a written account," Dora said. "If something happened," she said it that way. "If something happened, she wanted to know if there would be evidence that someone had seen." Kalen was very still. "She was not asking for help," he said. "She was asking whether there would be a record." "Yes," said Dora. "She was making sure that if something happened to her, it would not simply disappear." A silence. "I told her I kept very thorough records. I told her that my records were part of the pack's permanent documentation, and that nothing in them could be altered or removed without the Alpha King's personal authorization." She looked at him. "I thought if she knew that, if she knew the record existed and would continue to exist, she might feel safer." "Did she?" Dora was quiet for a moment. "I think it was the only thing available to her that was close to safety," she said, "so she held on to it." Kalen closed the ledger. He pressed both hands flat on the cover and looked at the table, and breathed, steadily, through a few full seconds. He was angry. He was aware of being angry in the specific way he had learned over 12 years to be aware of it, as a physical thing, a change in the quality of his breathing, and the tension in his hands, something that needed to be noted and governed rather than performed. Anger performed was just noise. Anger governed was something else. It was fuel, if you were careful with it. He was going to need to be very careful. "Her father," he said. Dora said nothing. She looked at him steadily. "Has she ever named her father in connection with any of this?" he asked. "No," Dora said. "She has never named anyone. She has been very careful never to name anyone." "But you know," he said. A long pause, the kind that had its own weight in it. "I am a healer," Dora said. "I observe and I record. Naming is for the Alpha King." She met his eyes. "And yes," she said quietly, "I know." Kalen stood up. He picked up the ledger. He looked at it for a moment. This small brown book, this record that Sarah had asked a healer to keep because she wanted evidence to exist, and he felt the weight of it in a way that had nothing to do with how much it physically weighed. "I will need this for a time," he said. "It is yours," Dora said. "It always was." He went to the door. He stopped. "When she comes to you," he said, "I want you to tell me. Not details. Not anything she has not chosen to share with me. Just that she has come." "Of course," Dora said. "And Dora." She waited. "You did not fail her," he said. "You kept the record. You stayed available. What you could do within the information you had, you did it." A pause. "What comes next is mine to carry." He left her office and walked the corridor with the ledger under his arm and his face arranged into the expression that gave away nothing, because there were pack members in the halls now, the morning in full movement, and the Alpha King's face was a thing that people read and drew conclusions from, and he could not afford to have conclusions drawn before he was ready. He went to the records room. Not the healer's office records, not the household ledger, the old records room, in the back of the estate, where the pack's history was kept. Births, deaths, disciplinary proceedings, formal complaints, the documentation of every significant decision made by every Alpha going back 4 generations. He had been in this room many times. He knew the filing system. He was looking for a specific period. 3.5 years ago, the months just before and after Harlan Voss returned to the main estate with his daughter following his wife's death. He pulled the files and sat at the reading table in the pale morning light, and went through them the way he went through any intelligence, systematically, without rushing, without allowing himself to skip ahead to what he was looking for, because what he was not looking for was sometimes as important as what he was. He found 3 things he had not expected. The first was a formal complaint filed 18 months ago by one of the settlement families in the Eastern Territory. A complaint that had come through the standard reporting channel, been noted by the administrative secretary, and been filed under pending because the secretary, a man named Hal Green who was 60 and conscientious and deeply uncomfortable with conflict, had listed it as a domestic matter and kicked it upward, and it had arrived on Harlan's desk and gone no further. The complaint was not from Sarah. It was from a woman in the Eastern Settlement who had seen Sarah during one of the quarterly visits the pack house made to the settlements, and had written down what she had seen and sent it through the proper channel because she did not know what else to do. The report was filed under pending. It had never reached Kalen. He set that document aside. The second thing was a pattern in the household expenditure records, not something that flagged itself as unusual if you were only looking at what was spent, but noticeable if you were looking at timing. Harlan Voss made irregular requests for specific supplies from the pack's medical stores. The requests were authorized by him as beta, within his authority, routine-looking, the kind of thing that would not raise a question in normal review. But the timing of the requests corresponded, within a day or two, to the dates in Dora Finch's ledger. He set the expenditure records beside the ledger. The third thing was the simplest and in some ways the worst. It was a note, handwritten, on a small piece of paper tucked into the back of the previous year's quarterly household report. A note in Sarah's handwriting. He recognized it from the household records she maintained, that careful small script that said nothing beyond a date and a few numbers that he looked at for a moment, before understanding that they were a reference code for the healer's record system. Just the code, nothing else. She had put a reference to her own healer's file inside the official household report, in case someone read it, in case someone checked, in case someone looked. She had been leaving small quiet marks in places where evidence was kept, like someone dropping stones in the dark to find their way back. He held the small piece of paper and looked at it for a long time. Kalen had been in command of this pack since he was 19 years old. He had made difficult decisions. He had been wrong before, had moved too fast or too slow, had trusted the wrong intelligence, had prioritized one thing at the cost of another. He was not a man who believed in his own infallibility. He had always been willing to look at where he had gone wrong and correct it. But he had never once, not in 12 years, imagined that the thing he was wrong about would be this, would be living in his own house, would be sitting in his kitchen at 3 a.m. learning to keep herself small enough that the walls around her did not notice she was breathing. He gathered the documents. He created a folder, the kind the records room used for formal cases, and he put Dora's ledger and the complaint from the Eastern Settlement woman and the expenditure records and the small piece of paper all inside it, in order, each one with a notation in his own handwriting of where it came from and when it had been created and what it was. He was building something. He was building it the way he built everything, carefully, without shortcuts, with full awareness that anything he built in haste would not hold when it needed to. He carried the folder back to his private office, which was separate from the council chamber, a smaller room with a fireplace and shelves of books and a window that looked north toward the mountain. He locked the folder in the lower drawer of his desk. He sat for a moment. Then he went to find Owen Cole. Owen was at the training grounds, running the junior group through footwork drills in the cold morning air. He saw Kalen coming across the grounds and immediately called a rest break for the trainees and jogged over. Owen Cole was 34, direct and loyal in the particular way of someone who had no talent for politics and therefore defaulted to honesty because deception required a specific kind of mental flexibility he simply did not have. Kalen liked him enormously. "I need something from you," Kalen said, "and I need it done carefully and quietly, and with no explanation given to anyone about why." Owen looked at him. "Yes," he said. "That was very fast," Kalen said. "You said carefully and quietly," Owen said. "Those are the 2 things I am best at when I am not running a training drill. Tell me what you need," Kalen told him. "Not everything. Enough." Owen listened with the focused stillness of a man who understood that when his Alpha King came to him personally before breakfast, what was being said mattered more than anything else on his schedule. When Kalen finished, Owen was quiet for a moment. "The Eastern Settlement," he said. "You want me to speak with the family that filed the complaint?" "Yes." Kalen said. Not officially. Not yet. I need to know what they saw and whether they are willing to say it formally, and whether there is anyone else in the settlement who saw something similar. And this stays between us, Owen said. Until I say otherwise, Kalen said. Yes. Owen nodded slowly. He looked at the training grounds, where the junior wolves were sitting on the frost-hardened grass drinking water and shoving each other and being 15 in the way that 15-year-olds are 15 regardless of pack rank. Then he looked back at Kalen. How long has this been going on? He asked. That, Kalen said, is one of the things I am trying to establish. Owen's jaw tightened very slightly. He was one of those people whose face was an honest reflection of their interior, and what his face showed for a moment was the controlled version of something that was not controlled underneath. Then he breathed through it. I will go today, he said. This afternoon. I can take the supply delivery as cover. I was going next week anyway. I will move it forward. Good, Kalen said. Thank you. He turned to go. Alpha King, Owen said. He stopped. Owen was looking at the training grounds again. The 15-year-olds who were shoving each other and not knowing that anything in particular was happening in the world of adults that would change things. She has been here 3 years, Owen said, in this house. Yes, said Kalen. A pause. I thanked her for the coffee every morning, Owen said. I want you to know that. It was automatic. I want you to know I understand what that means now, and I am aware of it. Kalen looked at him. I know, he said. He walked back across the training grounds toward the estate, and his face gave away nothing, and the cold morning air came down from the mountain, and the juniors started their drills again behind him, and the estate went on doing what it did every day in every ordinary respect. Inside the locked drawer of his desk was a folder. Inside the folder was a record of what Sarah Voss had endured in this house that was supposed to protect her. And inside Kalen's chest, carefully governed, directed somewhere useful, was the coldest and most focused anger he had felt in 12 years of carrying difficult things. He was going to need all of it. Owen Cole came back from the Eastern Settlement on the 4th day. He came directly to Kalen's private office without stopping to eat or change out of his travel clothes, which told Kalen something before Owen had said a single word. He closed the door behind him. He sat in the chair across the desk and put both hands flat on his knees and looked at Kalen with the specific expression of a man carrying more weight than he had expected to pick up. How many? Kalen said. Owen breathed. In the Eastern Settlement, 3 families who saw something they documented or remembered clearly enough to give me specifics. He paused. The woman who filed the original complaint. Her name is Mabel Hurst. She kept her own notes, dates, descriptions of what she observed on the 2 occasions Sarah visited the settlement with the household group. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket and set it on the desk. She gave me this. She said she had been holding on to it for a year and a half, waiting for someone with enough rank to use it. Kalen looked at the paper. He did not pick it up yet. She was waiting for someone to ask, he said. She did not know how to make anyone ask, Owen said. She sent the complaint through the formal channel, and it disappeared, and she did not know it had gone to Harlan rather than to you. She thought you had read it, and decided it was not sufficient. A pause. She was not angry with you. She thought the problem was with what she had written. She rewrote it twice after that, and did not send either version because she did not know who else to send it to. Kalen was quiet. The other 2 families, he said. One family, the Greer family, they have 4 children. They run the supply exchange on the settlement's east end. Their daughter was friends with Sarah during one of the seasonal work rotations, maybe 2 years ago. She said Sarah was very careful about not being touched, even accidentally. That when someone touched her arm, she went somewhere else for a moment. The daughter said she had never seen anyone do that before, and she did not know what it meant, but she remembered it, because it bothered her, and she had not talked about it until I sat down with her today. She remembered it for 2 years, Kalen said. She was 17, Owen said. She knew something was wrong, and she did not know what to do with knowing. He shifted in the chair. The 3rd family had seen Harlan with Sarah during one of the visits. They described the way he spoke to her in a public space as, the exact word the father used was crushing. He said it like he was watching something being made smaller than it should be, and not knowing who had the authority to tell the person doing it to stop. The room was quiet. Outside, the morning training was underway on the grounds, the faint sound of drills audible through the window, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary pack morning, the world doing what the world did. Is there more? Kalen asked. Yes, Owen said. He did not sound like he wanted to say so. I spoke with the pack healer's assistant, not Dora herself, her assistant, a young woman named Petra who has been working with Dora for 3 years. I did not tell her why I was asking. I asked about general patterns in the health records for pack members under 25. He paused. She said Sarah's file was the one Dora maintained most carefully. She said she had noticed that Dora updated it after every time Sarah came in, and that some of the updates seemed disconnected from what Sarah had officially come for. She said she had not said anything because she had not been asked. Kalen stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the training grounds. The junior group was running relays along the far edge of the grounds, back and forth in the cold air, their breath coming out in small clouds. They were fast and young and careless in the way that people are careless when they believe their world is stable and safe. He thought about Harlan Voss. 15 years. A man he had trusted with the second rank of his pack, with the administration of pack affairs, with the specific and significant authority of a beta, which was not merely a title but a function. The beta was the alpha's eyes and hands in 100 daily matters that the alpha did not have time to oversee personally. The beta's word carried weight. The beta's authority opened doors and closed cases and moved things forward or stopped them in their tracks. Harlan had used that authority. He had used it precisely. The complaint from the Eastern Settlement had stopped at his desk and gone no further. The administrative secretary, good, conscientious Hal Green, had routed it according to proper protocol, and Harlan had received it and filed it under pending, and it had never emerged. 15 years of service. A man who had sat in this office at this desk and spoken with calm authority about pack matters and management decisions and strategic planning, and had gone home to the same house where his daughter lived, and had used the private version of himself on someone who could not leave. Kalen pressed one hand flat against the cold glass. He had trusted Harlan, not blindly. He did not trust blindly. It was not his nature, but based on evidence accumulated over 15 years of observation. Evidence that was real. Harlan was genuinely a capable beta. He was genuinely skilled at administration and loyal to the pack's external interests and reliable in a crisis. None of that was false. The problem, Kalen now understood, was that he had looked at the official version of a man and called it the whole man. He had looked at the beta and not looked behind the title at the person wearing it. He had accepted the evidence he could see and not asked about what he could not. He had been precise in his intelligence and careless in a way that precision could not excuse. He turned around. "What do you need from me?" Owen asked. He asked it simply, directly, the way Owen did everything. "I need 2 things from you," Kalen said. "First, I need you to write down everything you gathered in the Eastern Settlement, everything Mabel Hurst told you, everything the Greer family told you, everything the Third family told you, in your own words, dated and signed. Do not clean it up. Do not decide what is relevant and what is not. Write it exactly as it was said." "Yes," Owen said, "tonight." "Second," Kalen said, "I need you to tell me something honestly, and I need you to not give me the version of honest that is shaped by what you think I want to hear." Owen looked at him steadily. "When have I ever given you that version?" "Never," Kalen said. "That is why I am asking you." He paused. "In your time at Ironvale, before today, before any of this, did you see something that made you wonder about Sarah Voss, or about her situation here? Anything at all, however small, that registered and then was filed away as someone else's business?" Owen was quiet. For a long moment he was quiet, and in that quiet, Kalen could see him going back through memory carefully, the way an honest person goes back when they are asked a serious question, not to find an answer, but to find the truth of what they actually remember, as opposed to what would be comfortable to say. "Once," Owen said, "about 8 months ago, she was carrying a delivery of linens from the laundry, and she dropped the basket, and when I reached down to help her pick things up, she moved back. Very fast. She said she was fine and picked everything up herself." He stopped. I thought about it for probably 2 seconds, and then I was thinking about the afternoon training schedule, and I did not think about it again. A pause. "I am not giving you that to excuse myself," Owen said. "I am giving it to you because you asked, and because it is what happened, and because the fact that I went back to thinking about training schedules in 2 seconds is something I will not do again." "I know," Kalen said. "Neither will I." He sat back down at the desk. He opened the locked drawer and took out the folder he had assembled and added the paper from Mabel Hurst to it, and looked at what was there now. The healer's ledger, the complaint, the expenditure records, the small note in Sarah's handwriting, and Mabel's account. He looked at the folder as a whole and felt the weight of it as the completed argument it was building toward. It was enough. He did not need more. He had been careful precisely because he wanted to be certain, because what he was going to do next was irreversible and had to be done on solid ground, and the ground was solid. He was not going on suspicion. He was not going on his own reading of a sleeve pull in a kitchen. He had evidence, documented and dated and corroborated from multiple independent sources, and it was enough. There is going to be a council proceeding, he said. I am not ready to say when yet. I need a few days to prepare what needs to be prepared. Owen nodded. In the meantime, Kalen said, I want Harlan's movements observed. Not intrusively. Not in a way that alerts him. I need to know where he is, and when, and who he speaks to. Can you manage that without making it visible? Yes, Owen said. And Owen. Kalen looked at him. Sarah should not be alone with her father at any point in the next several days. I cannot announce that as a formal protection. Not yet. Not until the proceeding is ready. But I need it to happen without being announced. Owen understood. His expression shifted into the particular focus of a man working out logistics. I can put someone in the central building on maintenance tasks, he said. 2 or 3 people rotating. It would look completely ordinary. Do it, Kalen said. Owen stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He paused at the door. She does not know any of this is happening, he said. Not a question. No, Kalen said, and I want to keep it that way until the proceeding is set. I do not want her to feel that anything is about to change before I can be there to be certain of her safety when it does. Owen nodded once. He left. Kalen sat alone in his office with the folder in front of him. Outside, the junior group had finished the relay drills and was now doing the groundwork exercises that Owen had apparently decided they needed. Flat on the frost-hardened grass, learning how to use the earth as both tool and cover. They did not know that their training captain had spent the last 4 days doing the most important reconnaissance of his career without leaving the territory. Kalen pulled a piece of paper toward him. He picked up a pen. He had a list to write. Things that needed to happen. In order. Precisely. He had always worked well from lists, had learned it from his uncle in the years before the sickness, had kept the habit because structure was the container that made difficult things manageable. At the top of the list he wrote 1 line. Then he set the pen down and sat looking at what he had written. Outside the wind came down from the mountain, and the junior wolves pressed their cheeks to the cold ground, and learned to be patient and still. And in the quiet of the private office, the Alpha King looked at his 1 written line, and understood that the next few days would change his pack in ways that could not be undone, and he felt no hesitation about any of it. Not 1 moment of hesitation. The line he had written said, Sarah Voss does not spend another night in this estate afraid. Everything else on the list that followed was in service of that. Every preparation, every document, every witness, every formal step of the proceeding, all of it was the architecture of that 1 sentence. He picked up the pen again. He began to write. On the 5th morning, Kalen made eggs. He did this badly. He was aware that he was doing it badly while he was doing it. The pan was too hot, the edges went brown before the center set, and he had put in too much salt because he had not been paying attention to the salt and had been thinking about the council chamber and the arrangement of chairs and whether the formal proceeding should be held in the main hall or somewhere smaller and more controlled. He looked at the eggs in the pan. They were not good eggs. He put them on a plate anyway, added bread from the rack, cut 2 pieces of fruit from the bowl on the counter, and carried all of it to the kitchen table. He sat down. He looked at what he had made. He thought, briefly, about Nora's feelings regarding the pan temperature, which she had explained to him with great patience approximately 6 years ago, and then he poured himself a cup of tea and waited. He had not told Sarah he was going to be in the kitchen in the morning. He had simply decided he was going to be in the kitchen in the morning, and he had come, and if she arrived, she arrived. And if she did not, that was also fine. And he was a man who had governed a pack for 12 years, and made very large decisions without excessive deliberation. And he was prepared to sit in the kitchen alone, if that was what happened. She arrived at 6:45. She came in through the back door with her hair half pinned and her coat still on, the way she always came in when she had been doing an early outdoor task, feeding the packhouse chickens, which lived in a small enclosure behind the east wall, and were Nora's personal project and one of the few things Nora asked for help with without it being a direct order. Sarah saw him and stopped. She looked at him. She looked at the plate on the table. I made eggs, he said. She came the rest of the way through the door. I can see that, she said. They are not very good. She took off her coat and hung it on the hook near the back door and came to the table and looked at the eggs with the expression of someone trying very hard not to say what they were thinking. They are quite brown at the edges, she said. The pan was too hot. Nora is going to be upset about the pan. Nora is not here yet, he said. Sit down. She sat. She looked at the plate of eggs. He pushed it toward her. I already ate, he said. Those are for you. She looked at him. You made breakfast for me. I attempted breakfast, he said. Whether what I made qualifies is open to interpretation. She looked at the eggs for another moment. Then she picked up the fork and took a bite. Her expression was careful, in the way of someone giving a genuinely honest evaluation and trying to frame it kindly. The center is fine, she said. That is the best possible reading of this situation, he said. Something moved in her face. Just the faintest corner of something lighter. She ate. He drank his tea. The kitchen was early morning quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs specifically to the hour before the household fully starts, when the light is still thin and the sounds from outside are just beginning. Outside the window, the chickens were audible, making the particular sounds that chickens make, which were not elegant but were cheerful in their own way. "How are the chickens?" he asked. She looked up. "Opinionated," she said. "They are always opinionated," he said. "Nora has raised them to believe they have say over their own schedule." "Millicent tried to peck me today," Sarah said. "The brown one." "Millicent does that. She has strong feelings about the order of feeding." Sarah looked at him. "You know the chickens by name." "I know everything in this estate by name," he said. "We have been through this." She looked at her plate. There was something moving in her expression that she was not quite managing to contain. Not the careful neutral, not the arranged composure. Something genuine, something that was trying to come forward and kept being held back by the habit of holding things back. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. She asked it quietly, without any particular challenge in it, not demanding, not suspicious. Just the honest question of someone who needed to understand something. He looked at her. "Doing what specifically?" he said. "The kitchen at night," she said. "The corridor, the chamomile tea. Now eggs in the morning." She looked at the plate. "You are the Alpha King. You have a great deal to do. You do not have to sit in the kitchen with me." "No," he said. "So why do you?" He was quiet for a moment. He picked up his cup. He thought about the honest answer, which was that the first night he had walked into the kitchen because his feet had taken him there without a plan, and he had sat down because something in the sound she made had stopped him in a way he could not have articulated then, and could barely articulate now. He thought about how the honest answer had grown into something more deliberate with each subsequent visit, less accident, more choice. "Because I want to," he said. She looked at him. "That is the complete answer," she said. "Yes," he said. "I want to. I chose to. There is no administrative reason." A pause. "You asked for honesty. That is the honest answer." She was quiet. She looked at the table with both hands around her teacup, and he could see her working through the statement. Not suspiciously, but carefully. The way someone handles something they have not been given often enough to know immediately what to do with it. "I am not very interesting," she said finally. "To talk to. I do not have. I have been in this house for 3 years. I do not go anywhere. I do not know things about the world outside the territory." "You know a great deal about pack governance," he said. "You ask better questions about the coastal negotiations than 3 of my council members." Color came into her face. "I only listen to what is discussed around me. Most people who have things discussed around them do not build frameworks for understanding those things," he said. "They retain facts. You do something different with them." She looked at him for a moment. "You noticed that," she said. "I notice most things," he said. Another silence. This one had the particular quality that their silences had developed. Not uncomfortable, not demanding, just present. He had begun to like the texture of it. "Tell me something about yourself," he said. "Something that is not about this house." She looked surprised. Then she looked thoughtful. He had noticed that on her face, the visible process of thinking, which she usually managed to conceal, but which appeared in unguarded moments, as a slight change in her focus, a drawing inward. It was one of the things he found most interesting about her. Most people thought with their mouths. She thought behind her eyes first. "I used to read a great deal," she said. "When I was younger, in the settlement, my mother had a large collection of books. Old ones, mostly. History, natural science, some philosophy." She paused. "I have not read much in the last few years. I have not had—" She stopped. "Time," she said. "I have not had time." He noted the pause, and what she had started to say before correcting it, and chose not to address it directly now. "What did you read?" he asked. "My favorite was a history of the early northern packs," she said. "Before the current territory system. The way the packs negotiated boundaries was completely different. More fluid, more seasonal. They did not think of territory the way we do now. It was less about ownership and more about use." She paused, and the slight look of someone who has said more than they intended moved across her face. "I am sorry. That is probably not very interesting." I have been managing Northern Territory disputes for 12 years, he said. Go on. She looked at him. Then, slowly, she went on. She talked about the early pack histories with the careful initial tentativeness of someone stepping onto ground they are not sure will hold, and then with increasing ease as the ground held and kept holding. She knew the material deeply, had clearly spent long hours in it, had formed opinions about it that were specific and well-reasoned, and occasionally argued against the scholarly consensus in ways that she defended with the confidence of someone who has thought about something long enough to know they are right. He asked questions, real questions, not the conversational kind that merely keep a thing moving. She answered them and occasionally pushed back on what he said, and once looked almost startled by her own pushback and glanced at him as if checking whether she had stepped somewhere she should not have. He looked back at her steadily. She pushed back again. After that it went differently. After that it had the quality of a real conversation between two people who were both present in it. Nora arrived at 7 and looked at the two of them sitting at her kitchen table over the ruins of badly made eggs and the good tea and said nothing whatsoever, which was the loudest thing she had done in several years. Kalen helped Sarah clear the plates. He was bad at this too. He stacked them wrong and she showed him the correct way without making a ceremony of it, just moved his hand to the right angle as if it were obvious, which it was, which was why she did not make anything of it. She had touched his hand to correct his plate stacking and then gone to the sink as if nothing had happened. He looked at his correctly angled plates and felt something he had not felt in so long that it took him a moment to identify it. It was not complicated, it was not large, it was the very simple feeling of wanting to come back to this kitchen tomorrow morning, and the morning after that. He left the kitchen and returned to the north wing and the folder in the locked drawer, and the list that needed to happen before anything else could be built. And he moved through his morning with the contained and organized efficiency that the pack knew him for, and no one saw anything different in him. Inside, he was thinking about a girl who had read herself through old pack histories in a small settlement and had carried that knowledge here, to a house that had not known what to do with her, and had kept it carefully because it was hers and nothing had been able to take it from her. He was thinking about all the things she had kept carefully. He was thinking about what it meant to finally have someone who would keep them for her. He had 3 days to prepare the council proceeding. He was going to use all of them. He was going to walk into that chamber with everything in order, with no gaps, with nothing that could be questioned or dismissed or delayed. He was going to do this correctly, for her. The council chamber was in the oldest part of the estate. It had been built by Kalen's great-grandfather, when the pack was a third of its current size, and the Northern Territory was still contested land, and it had the quality of rooms built in contested times. Solid walls, one entrance, high windows that let in light, but not easy observation. The table was long and dark and had absorbed 100 years of difficult conversations into its grain. The chairs around it were plain and functional. There was nothing in the room that was decorative. Kalen had always liked the chamber for this reason. It made things serious. When you sat in a room with no decoration, you were aware that you were there to work. He arrived early on the morning of the proceeding. He arranged the documents on the table in the order he would present them. He checked the room twice, not for anything specific, simply because he was precise, and precision included verifying the conditions of important things. Then he stood at the window and looked out at the territory in the early gray light, and breathed steadily. He had told Harlan Voss 2 days ago that there would be a council proceeding on a governance matter. He had said it without expression, in passing, in the way he communicated most things, matter-of-factly, without preparation of the recipient, because he had learned over 12 years that the manner of a statement told people as much as the content. He had not said what the governance matter was. Harlan had nodded and said he would be there. The council members arrived in the order they usually did. First was the head of the Eastern Settlement, a gray-haired woman named Clara Brandt who had held the position for 9 years, and who read the room when she walked into it with the practiced eye of someone who had been reading rooms since before it was her job to do so. She looked at the document arrangement on the table and then at Kalen and said nothing. Then the senior advisor, a man named Jeffrey Marsh, careful and thorough and very slow to alarm. Then 2 of the pack's territorial witnesses, the formal positions required to be present at any official proceeding, whose role was to observe and confirm that procedure was followed. Then Owen Cole, who sat at the far end of the table and put both hands flat on the surface in front of him. Last was Harlan Voss. He came in with the ease of a man who had attended 100 council proceedings and saw no reason to expect this one to be different from the others. He was in his formal beta attire, the dark coat with the pack's insignia at the collar, the bearing of someone who inhabited their rank as naturally as breathing. He sat in his usual chair, second from the Alpha King's right, and folded his hands on the table. "Good morning," he said to the room. Several people returned it. Clara Brandt did not. Owen Cole did not. Kalen sat down. He opened the folder. He did not make a speech. He did not set a scene. He said, "I am presenting findings regarding the welfare of a PAC member." He said the name. He said the name in the same even, unornamented way that he had said everything else, because the name deserved to be said with the same weight as the evidence, not dramatically but seriously. He began with Dora Finch's ledger. He read from it. Not extensively, just dates and the nature of the entries, the clinical record that Dora had maintained with the precision of someone who knew that precision was what made a record useful. He placed the ledger in the center of the table. He noted that Dora was available to speak to the council directly if required. He moved to the complaint from the Eastern Settlement. He noted the date it was filed. He noted the channel through which it was submitted. He noted where it had been received and what had happened to it after that. He placed the complaint on the table beside the ledger. He did not look at Harlan. He presented the evidence in order, without drama, with the thoroughness of a man who had spent 3 days making certain that nothing in this folder could be questioned or dismissed. He presented Mabel Hurst's account. He presented Owen's documentation of the Eastern Settlement conversations. He presented the expenditure pattern and the correspondence between its dates and the healer's records. He placed the small piece of paper, Sarah's handwriting, the record reference, on the table last. Then he set the empty folder down and looked at the council. Jeffrey Marsh was very still, in the way of someone working very hard to maintain composure through something that was pulling at all the edges of it. Clara Brandt had her hands folded on the table and was looking at them with an expression that was careful and pained and present. The territorial witnesses were doing their job, observing, not reacting, recording in the small notebooks they brought to proceedings. Owen Cole was looking at the table. Harlan Voss was looking at Kalen. His expression was not the one Kalen had expected. He had expected denial, or calculation, or the performance of a misunderstood man reaching for justification. What was on Harlan's face was something else. Not innocence, not bluster. It was the expression of a man who had known, at some level, that a door he had locked was eventually going to be opened, and had been living with the weight of that door for so long that the opening of it was almost a different kind of weight entirely. He did not speak. Kalen looked at him. "Do you wish to respond to any part of what has been presented?" he said. A long silence. "No," Harlan said. The word was flat. Not broken, not pleading. Flat, in the way of something finally set down. Kalen looked at the council. "The witnesses will confirm that no denial has been entered into the record." The witnesses confirmed it. "We will take a brief recess before I present the decision," Kalen said. "Please remain in this building." He stood and walked out of the chamber. He went to the small room off the corridor, closed the door, and stood in the quiet for approximately 3 minutes. He was not composing himself. His composure had not fractured. He was simply doing what he did when he had done something irreversible and significant, standing in the specific moment of having done it, and letting himself understand fully that it was done. He did not rush through this. He had learned over 12 years that the decision and the weight of the decision had to coexist, and that trying to move past the weight too quickly meant carrying it somewhere else where it would eventually surface at the wrong time. He stood in the quiet room. Then he went back to the chamber. He sat down. He laid out the decision he had prepared, not improvised, not reactive. He had written it over 2 days, had read it a dozen times, had adjusted 3 elements after speaking with the PAC's traditional lawkeeper, who was a retired alpha from a neighboring territory, who served as Iron Vale's formal law advisor. The decision was this. Harlan Voss's rank as Beta was formally and permanently revoked. His authority over any PAC member was terminated. His access to administrative systems, records, and the formal channels of PAC governance was ended immediately. He would be relocated from the main estate to the westernmost settlement, the smallest of the 4, where he would be permitted to live as a civilian member of the PAC under the supervision of that settlement's head. He would have no authority. He would hold no rank. If at any future point any evidence emerged of harm to any person under this PAC's protection, he would be expelled from the territory entirely. The council members who had received information, through formal or informal channels, suggesting harm to a PAC member, and had not brought that information to the Alpha King were formally noted in the record. Hal Green, the administrative secretary. 2 senior staff members whose peripheral awareness had been established by Owen's investigation. Their formal notation meant that their conduct was part of the PAC's permanent record. It was not a gentle thing. Kalen read all of this without haste. When he was done, he set the pages down. "Are there formal objections from any council member?" he asked. No one spoke. "Witnesses, please confirm the proceeding for the record." They confirmed it. "We are concluded," Kalen said. "Owen, please coordinate Harlan's relocation with the Western Settlement head. I want it completed within 48 hours." Owen nodded once. The council members began to leave. Clara Brandt paused beside Kalen's chair. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You should have been told sooner, and I am sorry for my part in that not happening." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "You should have. We are correcting it now." She nodded and left. Harlan was the last to stand. He had not spoken again since the single word of his non-denial. He stood with the slowness of a man whose body had gotten heavier in the course of a morning. He looked at the table, the documents, the ledger, the small piece of paper, and then at Kalen. There was a moment where nothing was said. Kalen looked at the man who had served him faithfully for 15 years and had taken the private hours of that service and used them in ways that Kalen would not put language to, because language was for understanding things, and there were some things that were not meant to be understood, only stopped. "Go," Kalen said. Harlan went. The chamber was empty. Kalen sat in it for a while. He looked at the long table and the high windows and the walls that had held difficult conversations for 100 years, and he sat with the specific weight of justice that arrives too late, not triumphant, not satisfying in the way that the word justice sometimes implies, when people who have not had to deliver it talk about what it feels like. It felt like the exact right thing done in a world where the most right thing available was still not enough. He picked up the documents. He replaced them in the folder. He carried the folder to the records room himself, filed it in the formal case system himself, and locked the cabinet. He stood in the records room for a moment. Then he thought about Sarah, who did not know that this morning had happened, who was in the kitchen, or the laundry, or the records room, doing the tasks that had been her life in this estate, and who would be told before the day was done. He walked out of the records room and into the corridor and moved through the estate toward the morning. Kalen told her himself. He did not send someone. He did not leave a note or a formal message or ask Dora to do it, which would have been the practical choice and the wrong one. He found Sarah in the small back room where she kept the household records, sitting at the reading table with the afternoon ledger open in front of her and a pen in her hand, the light from the window falling across the page at the low, late angle it always came in at this hour. She heard him come in, she turned, and her face went through the brief process of registering his presence, the slight adjustment, the careful arrangement, and then she saw something in his expression that stopped the arrangement before it finished. She set down the pen. He sat across from her, not at his formal distance, not with the desk between them. He pulled the chair to her side of the table and sat beside her, close enough that the shift in the dynamic was clear without any words being said about it. He was not here as the Alpha King. He was here as the man who had sat across from her in the kitchen and asked how she was, and learned that she had read herself through Northern Pack histories in a settlement she had not been allowed to leave. He told her, not all of it, not the granular detail of everything in the folder. He told her what mattered, that the council had met, that a formal proceeding had taken place, that Harlan's rank had been revoked and that he would be relocated to the Western Settlement, that it was done, and it was permanent, and it was part of the Pack's official record, and nothing could undo it. He told her about the healer's ledger, that Dora had kept it, that Dora had been keeping it for a year and a half, waiting for someone with enough authority to act. He told her that Mabel Hurst in the Eastern Settlement had filed a complaint 18 months ago and kept rewriting it and not knowing who to send it to. He told her that a 17-year-old girl in the Greer family had remembered for 2 years and been waiting for someone to ask. He told her all of this in the same plain, even way he told her everything, not gently in the sense of softening things, but honestly, in the sense of respecting what she could carry. He did not wrap any of it in words that tried to make it smaller than it was. He did not try to make the late arrival of any of it easier to swallow than it actually was. When he finished, the room was very quiet. Sarah was looking at the table, both hands in her lap, very still. He waited. She was doing something he recognized, the internal process of absorbing a piece of information that the mind needs a moment to find a place for, because the place where it should go has been occupied by something else for so long that rearranging it takes time. He had done this himself, more times than he could count. He knew what it looked like from the outside. He did not rush it. Dora kept a record, she said, eventually. Yes, he said. For 18 months. Yes. Sarah nodded, very slightly. She was looking at the grain of the table. I asked her to, she said. I did not know if she had. I asked her to, and then I did not ask her again. I did not want to know whether she had or had not, because if she had not, I would have had to. I would have needed to do something else. and I did not know what else there was. A pause. So I did not ask. She had, Kaylin said. Every entry, every date. Sarah breathed. Just once, in and out, with the particular quality of someone for whom a thing they had been holding their breath about for 18 months has finally resolved in one direction or the other. Mabel Hurst, she said. I remember her. From the Eastern Settlement visit. She had a dog. She does, Kaylin said. Large one. Follows her everywhere. Sarah looked at her hands in her lap. She wrote a complaint, she said. She did not know me. No, Kaylin said. She saw something and she wrote it down. Because it was wrong, Sarah said. Yes. Something moved in her face. He watched it carefully, the way he watched things that mattered. Not intrusively, not with the expectation of a particular response, just present and attending. It was not what he might have called relief. It was not gratitude, although it had some of the texture of gratitude. It was something more complicated and less nameable, the expression of someone who has been told, for the first time with full credibility, that they were right to have thought something was wrong, that the thing they lived in was not a thing they were supposed to live in, that the world outside it knew so and had written it down, that they had been seen, even when they did not know it, by a woman with a dog in the Eastern Settlement who had written a complaint and rewritten it, and kept it, and waited. What happens now, she said. It was not quite a question. You stay here, Kaylin said, if that is what you choose. Nothing about your place in this estate changes except that the thing that was wrong in it is no longer here. She looked at him. And if I do not want to stay here, she said carefully, then we find you somewhere you want to be, he said. You have options, Sarah. That is the thing I most need you to understand. You have options now. Whatever you decide to do with your life in this territory, where you live, what you do, whether you work in the kitchen or read old pack histories or become a council advisor, all of it is a choice that belongs to you. He held her eyes. It has always belonged to you. I am sorry it did not feel that way. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away. Her jaw moved. Not to speak, just the small physical thing that happens when something large is moving through a person who has been built to not let large things be visible. He sat with her in the back room for a while. He did not fill the quiet. He let it be what it was, the specific quiet of something ending and something else not yet having a shape. After some time, she asked him a practical question. About the Western Settlement, what it was like there, whether Harlan would have access to the quarterly visits that the main estate made to the settlements. He told her. She listened with the focus she brought to everything, the processing that happened behind her eyes, and she asked one more question and he answered it. Practical questions were what she had. He understood that. Emotions of this size needed somewhere to be put while they were being absorbed, and practical questions were the container. He answered them all. When she stood up from the table, he stood up too. She said I should finish the ledger before the evening. He said yes. She looked at him, and in her expression was something he wanted very much to name but did not, because it was not yet at the stage where naming it would make it more real, rather than more frightened. He left her to the ledger in the afternoon light in the back room that was hers in the particular way that small kept spaces become yours when the rest of the world has not been. Outside the estate, the Western Settlement head was receiving a communication about an incoming relocation. The mountain stood as it always stood, unchanged by the things that changed underneath it. Pack members moved through their afternoons without knowing, most of them, that something fundamental in the estate had shifted today. Over the next several days they would know. Word moved through a pack the way water moved through earth, not always following the path you expected, finding the channels that already existed. By the following morning, the council members who had been in the chamber had each spoken to at least one other person. By afternoon, the secondary ripple was moving. By evening, the estate had the particular quality of a place where people know something significant has happened and are working out how to hold it. Sarah did not announce herself into any of this. She did not emerge from the back room and become a different person. She finished the ledger. She helped with the evening meal. She sat at the kitchen table after dinner with her chamomile tea, and she was exactly herself, contained, careful, competent, and now carrying the knowledge that someone had seen what had been done to her, and had said so, formally and permanently, into the record of the pack. That knowledge did not look like anything from the outside. Kaylin knew it was in there anyway. He knew the way you know things that matter, not from evidence alone, but from the quality of attention you have been paying to a person long enough to understand the difference between how they look and what they are carrying. He had been paying that attention for 2 weeks. He planned to keep paying it. 3 months passed. They passed in the way of months that contain real change, not smoothly, Not in a clean arc with a visible shape, but in the irregular forward movement of things that are actually happening, rather than things being arranged to look as though they are. Some days were straightforward. Some days were not. The estate adjusted around the absence of one person and the presence of another version of itself. The way a room adjusts when you move a large piece of furniture. The shape of everything shifts slightly, and for a while you keep reaching toward where something used to be. Sarah moved to a different room. She had done it without fanfare, in the practical way she did most things. She had gone to the estate's housing coordinator, a cheerful, efficient woman named B. Norris who had been managing pack house accommodations for 11 years, and whose cheerfulness was not the annoying kind but the genuinely useful kind, the kind that made administrative processes feel like something a sensible person would willingly do, and she had said she would like a different room if one was available. Bea had given her 3 options. Sarah had chosen the one with the south-facing window. The new room was larger than the old one. It had a window that looked out over the lower training grounds rather than a courtyard wall, and morning light came through it at a good angle, and there was room for a chair in addition to the bed, which meant there was a place to sit when she did not want to be in any of the common rooms but also did not want to be lying down. She had put a book on the chair, the old Northern Pack history, which she had found in the estate's library collection on the same afternoon she moved rooms, as though the universe had decided that this was the week to return things that had been misplaced. She had started to read in the evenings. This was a small thing. It was also, Kaylin had noted, not a small thing. The communal dinners happened every evening. Sarah had a place at the table. Had always had a place at the table. Technically, that piece of Iron Vale's founding rules had always been true, and she now sat in it. Not every night, not yet. 2 or 3 evenings a week she appeared at the table rather than behind it, and she sat in the chair that had always been assigned to her and ate with the pack members and was spoken to by some of them, and spoke back in the careful, measuring way of someone who has learned to calibrate how much of themselves to put into a given conversation. Some of the pack members were gracious about it. Owen Cole, who sat nearby, spoke to her about the training program changes with the directness of someone who had decided to simply treat her as a person he knew, without making any of the awkward gestures of overcorrection. Clara Brandt from the Eastern Settlement, who visited monthly, had introduced herself formally the first time she saw Sarah at dinner, as though they had never stood in the same room before, and Sarah had looked at her for a moment before understanding that it was an offer of a clean beginning and had shaken her hand. Some of the pack members were less graceful about it. Some tried too hard, offered too much warmth in the loaded way of people managing guilt, looked at her with the specific quality of eyes that were carrying something they did not know how to put down. She was patient with these people. She was patient with most things. She did not discuss what had happened with anyone who had not been part of it. She did not narrate it, did not perform it, did not wear it. She simply continued to exist in the estate as herself, which was becoming clear, a considerably more interesting person than the furniture version that most people had interacted with for 3 years. Nora knew this already. Nora had always known. Nora had simply been waiting, with the particular patience of someone who had watched a great many things develop in 30 years, and had learned that waiting was sometimes the most useful thing available. Kaylin continued to be in the kitchen in the mornings. He got better at eggs. This was something he had decided privately, without telling anyone, and had worked at with the same systematic focus he brought to things that mattered. He had asked Nora to show him 3 things: eggs, bread, and a simple soup. And Nora had shown him with the brisk efficiency of someone teaching things that should have been learned 20 years ago, and having moved past judgment about the delay. He practiced. The eggs improved measurably. Sarah had noted the improvement and commented on it in the dry way that was becoming her register with him. Not warm exactly, not yet, but pointed in a direction that warmth was a reasonable thing to reach from. He had told her about the soup. She had looked at him. "You made soup?" she said. "I attempted soup," he said. The result was, Nora described it as optimistic. "Optimistic soup," she said. She meant well by it, I think. The corner of her mouth had moved. Just the faintest corner. He had catalogued it the way he catalogued everything. They talked. In the kitchen in the mornings, in the corridor occasionally, once in the estate library where she had been deeply absorbed in something when he came in, and had looked up with the unfocused expression of someone returning from a long distance and said, "Oh," and he had sat in the armchair by the fire and read reports while she finished her chapter, and neither of them had said anything about the comfortable quality of that particular silence. She talked about the pack histories. She talked about a documentary she had found in the estate's small archive about the coastal territories that she had watched twice because the second time she caught things she had missed the first time. She talked about Millicent the chicken, who had developed a personal vendetta against the delivery boy and needed to be managed with care. She did not talk about her father. He did not ask her to. He had asked her, once, in the 4th week after the proceeding, whether she was sleeping better, and she had said yes, not automatically, the way she had said things in the beginning, but after a brief pause that meant she was checking whether it was true. Yes, she had said, better. He had said good. They had moved on. One evening in the 2nd month, she asked him something he had not expected. They were in the kitchen, the evening version, not the 3 in the morning version, which was a distinction that had appeared organically at some point in the preceding weeks. The morning kitchen was the one with the eggs and the practical conversation, and Nora arriving at some point to take over the space in a way that was clearly a form of approbation. The evening kitchen was less frequent, quieter, the household staff gone and the fires banked and the day's noise settled. She had come to make her chamomile tea. He had come because he was walking past and had seen the light under the door, and had made the decision that had stopped requiring significant deliberation sometime in the 2nd month. She made 2 cups without being asked. She set one in front of him. They sat and she said, "What was it like when you were young, before you were the Alpha King?" He looked at her. She said, "You do not have to answer." He said, "I want to." And he told her, not the formal version, not the narrative of a young man taking command at 19, the competent leadership story that the pack knew, the other version. The version where he was 17 and his uncle was alive, and he was supposed to have a decade before any of this fell to him, and he had been spending that decade learning things in no particular order, reading what interested him, arguing with his uncle about territorial policy, being very bad at cooking and not particularly bothered by it, because cooking had not seemed like something that would ever matter. He told her about his uncle and the way the sickness had moved through the pack and the 4 hours of saying names. He told her about the first year, which had been the hardest year, when everything was uncertain, and he had been running on competence and structure, and the absolute refusal to show anyone how uncertain he was, because showing uncertainty was a luxury he had not been able to afford. He told her, eventually, about the window on the wrong side of the building, that he had been doing it for years, walking at night, that particular window, the territory spread out below, not because he liked being awake at 3 in the morning, because sleep had been something that required a level of stillness he had not always been able to find. She was quiet through most of this. She listened the way she read, with the full focus behind her eyes, the processing visible, the genuine presence of someone for whom what they are hearing is actually going in. When he stopped, she was quiet for a moment. "You have been alone in this for a long time," she said. Not a question, not sympathy in the pitying sense, just a statement, made with the same plain honesty that she brought to things she had thought about carefully. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She held her cup in both hands. She looked at the table. He watched her decide whether to say the next thing, watched the internal check that she still ran, less frequently than before, less automatically, but still present. She said it. "You do not have to be," she said, "if you do not want to." She said it to the table. She was not going to look at him immediately after saying it, which he understood, because it was the kind of thing that required a moment to exist in the air, before anyone addressed it directly. He gave it the moment. Then he said, "No, I do not suppose I do." She looked up. He was looking at her, steadily, the way he looked at things that mattered to him, with the full attention that most people found slightly uncomfortable, and that she had, over 3 months, come to understand was not a performance of attention but the thing itself. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she looked back at her tea and said, "Good. Just that. Good." He sat with her in the kitchen and drank his tea and did not say anything else about it, because some things are said once and are complete and do not require further architecture. He had learned that from her. She had learned to say things once and mean them fully and not require confirmation, because for a long time confirmation had not been something she could rely on. He was finding, over these months, that he was learning a great many things from her. The fire held through the evening the way it always did. The pack gathering happened once every 4 months. It was one of Ironvale's oldest traditions, older than the estate itself, older than the current territory boundaries, going back to the days when the pack was small enough that every member could stand in one field together and see every other face. The size of the pack had grown considerably since then, and the tradition had grown with it, adapting to become a 2-day event held at the main estate and attended by members traveling in from all 4 settlements. It was part celebration, part formal check-in, part the communal renewal of the thing that made a pack rather than just a population of people living in proximity. Kalen had organized it every year for 12 years. He knew its rhythms: the first morning's formal gathering in the Great Hall, the afternoon's open grounds events, the evening meal that went long and loud and into the night, the second day quieter and more scattered as people visited and traded and did the informal business of being connected. This year felt different, not in its structure. The structure was identical, different in the quality of his attention to it, the awareness that he was walking through a gathering of 300+ people who were, each of them, genuinely his. Not the abstract his of a territory or a rank. The particular his of people whose names he knew, and whose lives he was responsible for, and whom he had, in some cases, failed to see clearly enough for long enough. He had been thinking about that differently since the kitchen at 3 a.m. 5 months ago. He stood at the edge of the Great Hall on the first morning and watched the arrivals, the Eastern settlement coming in their characteristic loose group, children running ahead of the adults, the Greer family visible near the back, their daughter now 19, and no longer 17, and still, apparently, telling the story of the things she had remembered for 2 years to everyone who would hear it, which Kalen knew because Owen had told him with a look that was one of the most satisfied expressions he had ever seen on Owen's face. Mabel Hurst was there from the Eastern settlement. She arrived with her very large dog, who technically was not permitted inside the estate, and was making eye contact with Kalen across the entrance hall with the confident bearing of an animal that knew its status was being overlooked. Kalen made the decision not to see the dog. Mabel caught his eye and gave him a single direct nod. He returned it. He moved through the morning greeting the settlement representatives, speaking with council members, doing the formal parts of the gathering that required him to be the alpha king in the ceremonial sense rather than just the practical one. He was good at this. He had always been good at this, but he moved through it differently today, with slightly more actual presence in it, slightly less of the administration of distance that had characterized his management of large gatherings in previous years. Clara Brandt noticed. She said so, in the direct way she had that he appreciated. "You seem more here than usual," he said. "I am trying to be." She said, "Good." The afternoon events moved to the grounds. The traditional games, foot races and the tug competitions and the archery challenges that the pack took very seriously, and about which an enormous amount of informal wagering occurred despite this being technically against the rules that everyone, including Kalen, chose to enforce with selective attention. The children's events were the most enthusiastic. The sound of the pack in motion was a particular sound, layered and loud and alive in a way that the ordinary week's daily sounds were not, the specific sound of 300 people in the same place, and aware of each other. Kalen was watching the archery competition with Owen when he saw Sarah. She was near the far edge of the gathering, not the very edge, not positioned to leave, but not in the center of things either. She was standing with B. Norris, and another woman he recognized as one of the kitchen staff from the Eastern settlement visit, the three of them watching the competition with the ease of people who were comfortable with each other. Sarah was wearing a light-colored shirt, the kind she usually wore under her working coat. The sleeves were short. He noticed it in the way you notice something that matters without having to be told it matters. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it was announced. She was simply standing in the afternoon light with her arms uncovered in the way of a person who was warm and had not thought twice about it, talking to B. Norris about something that made B laugh loudly enough to carry across the noise of the gathering. He stood with that for a moment. Owen, beside him, had also seen it. He said nothing about it. He just watched the archery competition and said, "Maddie Vance is going to win. She has been practicing since August." Kalen said, "She always wins." Owen said, "Every year I still think someone else will. That is the optimistic part of my character." Kalen crossed the gathering grounds. He moved through the crowd in the way he always moved through the pack. Not unnoticed, never unnoticed, but not preceded by announcement either. People made room and then went back to what they were doing, which was how he preferred it. He reached the far edge where Sarah and B and the Eastern settlement woman were standing. B saw him first. Her expression did its thing, the slight formal adjustment, then the remembering that he had been in her housing coordination office twice in recent weeks for reasons not related to formal Alpha King business. And then she said, "Alpha King, have you met Cora from the settlement kitchen team?" He had not. He introduced himself. Cora was delighted in the way of people who have rehearsed being delighted about unlikely situations, and discovered, in the moment, that the delight was actually real. Then he looked at Sarah. She was looking at him, with the expression that had replaced, over 5 months, the careful neutral she used to maintain. It was still measured, still contained, but underneath the measuring was something else now, something that had come forward to live closer to the surface over the months, something that was more present in her face when he was the person she was looking at. "How is the gathering?" he said. "Loud," she said. "And good." Maddie Vance is going to win the archery, he said. She wins every year, Sarah said. Owen refuses to believe it until it happens. Owen, said Sarah, is optimistic in a very specific and consistent way. Bea was watching the two of them with the expression of someone watching something confirm a theory they have been developing for several months. Cora had gone back to watching the archery. There are people I would like you to meet, Kaylin said. Sarah looked at him. Not formally, he said. Not as any kind of official introduction. Simply, there are people here who know your name and would like to know your face, and I would like to introduce you to them. She understood what he meant, not the general population of the gathering, the specific ones, Mabel Hurst, the Greer family, Clara Brandt, the people who had in various ways been part of the record that had been built and kept and used. She was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. He brought her to Mabel Hurst first. Mabel was a short, solid woman, with the weathered complexion of someone who spent a great deal of time outdoors, and the eyes of someone who spent a great deal of time paying attention. Her dog was at her feet, enormous and utterly unbothered by the crowd around it. Mabel, Kaylin said. This is Sarah. Mabel looked at Sarah, not with the pity eyes, not with the loaded sidelong quality that Sarah had learned to brace for. Just directly, the look of one person taking a full and honest measure of another. I know who you are, Mabel said. I kept hoping you would come to the settlements more often. I had things I wanted to say and the letters never felt like enough. Sarah was very still for a moment. You wrote a complaint, she said. I did, Mabel said, and I rewrote it twice and could not get it to anyone useful until this young man came and asked. She indicated Kaylin without looking at him, the offhand gesture of someone whose attention was fully on the other person. I want you to know that what I saw mattered to me. I do not have a speech. I just wanted you to know that another person looked at what was happening and said no. That is what I wanted you to know. Sarah looked at her. Thank you, she said. The words were simple and she meant them entirely, and Mabel nodded once and reached down to put her hand on her enormous dog's head. This is Bernard, she said to Sarah. He is not supposed to be here. He will not cause any trouble. Sarah looked at Bernard. She reached out, slowly, and let him smell her hand. Bernard regarded her with the dignified assessment of a dog who takes himself seriously. Then he put his head under her hand. She looked at Mabel. He likes you, Mabel said in a tone that suggested this was the highest possible endorsement. They moved through the gathering. The Greer family daughter, her name was Iris it turned out, Iris Greer, 19 years old and now training for a seasonal position with the Eastern Settlements record-keeping team, shook Sarah's hand with the slightly formal intensity of someone who had thought about this moment. She said, I should have said something sooner, Sarah said. You were 17, and you did not know who to say it to. Iris looked at her with the expression of someone being offered something they had not expected, and did not quite know where to put. Then she said, I would like to know you, if that is all right. And Sarah said, yes. Clara Brandt found them on the second pass. She said to Sarah, I am glad to see you here. Just that. No apology, no elaborate gesture. Kaylin had come to understand that Clara Brandt communicated value through simplicity. She said things plainly because she meant them exactly as much as she said them and not more. Sarah, who had been absorbing people's excess for 3 years and filing it somewhere she did not currently want to look, visibly received this as the right amount of something. Toward the evening, when the gathering had moved indoors to the long dinner tables and the noise had reached its peak and the food was on its second round and children were falling asleep under chairs while their parents talked over their heads, Kaylin found Sarah at the center table. Not the serving end, the center table, where the pack members ate, where she had been placed by B. Norris with great strategic care and no apparent effort. So naturally had B managed the seating that Sarah had simply arrived and sat down without registering that anything unusual had been arranged. She was talking to Owen. He could tell from across the room that it was a real conversation, the kind where both people are present and responding to what is actually being said. Owen was animated in a way that he usually reserved for training discussions, and she was looking at him with the slight focus behind the eyes expression that meant she was genuinely interested. Something about the training programs, he thought, from the way Owen was gesturing. She had asked once about how the junior training protocols were developed, and he had described a conversation with Owen about it that had apparently left her with additional questions. She was sitting at the center table at the communal gathering, talking to his training captain about training protocols, wearing short sleeves. He crossed the room. People moved aside in the automatic way. He reached the center table. He sat in the empty chair beside Sarah, not across from her, beside her, which was a position he had never taken at this table before, had always sat at the head position, the Alpha King's seat. Owen looked at him with an expression of perfect blandness that was doing a great deal of work concealing something. "We were talking about the junior programs," Sarah said. "I know," Kaylin said. I could hear Owen gesturing from across the room. Owen said, "I do not gesture." Kaylin said, "You gesture constantly." Sarah said, "You were doing the thing with both hands." She demonstrated briefly, and Owen looked at his hands as though betrayed by them. They sat at the center table and ate with the pack, and the noise was all around them, and the children were falling asleep under chairs, and Mabel Hurst's dog was somewhere in the building doing nothing that was technically objectionable. And the gathering did what gatherings did when they were good ones. It held people inside something larger than the sum of its parts. At some point, Sarah leaned slightly toward him, not to say anything. Just the small adjustment of a person who has decided that the space they are in is one they want to be in. He noticed it. He noticed it the way he noticed everything that mattered, fully, without performance, with the quiet internal acknowledgement of a man who had learned, over 5 months of kitchen mornings and corridor conversations and chamomile tea and badly made eggs, that paying attention was not a skill exclusive to territory management and strategic planning. It was also just what you did for people who were worth it. And she was. She was worth every minute of it. Outside, the gathering fire burned on the grounds. The mountain stood in the dark the way it always stood. 312 pack members were inside the estate, louder and more present than they were on any ordinary evening. Somewhere in the western settlement, a man who had once held the second rank of this pack was living with the quiet and the weight of what he had lost and would not have returned to him. Inside the estate, at the center table of the communal dinner, the Alpha King sat beside his Beta's daughter and listened to Owen Cole defend his non-gesturing with increasing passion, and the girl who had once eaten last, or not at all, was eating now, in the middle of everything, with both arms on the table and nothing hidden. He had told himself once, a long time ago, that he did not know how to be warm. He looked at the table, at the food and the noise and Owen's expressive hands and the children sliding under their chairs, and Mabel Hurst somewhere in the building with her unauthorized dog, and thought that perhaps warm was not a thing you learned in theory. Perhaps it was a thing you learned by choosing to be in the right kitchen at the right hour, and then choosing to stay. He had made that choice. He was still making it. He planned to keep making it.